Welcome to the IT Free Training video on DNS Round Robin and Netmask Ordering. These features allow you to use DNS to provide simple load balancing and helps direct users to local resources rather than resources on remote networks. First of all, I will look at Round Robin. To understand Round Robin, consider this example. You have 3 servers that are providing web services. Each server has identical data on it. To make things simpler for the user, you want the user to use a single name to access any of the servers. Since the servers have the same information on them, it does not matter which server the user is directed to. To achieve this, on the DNS server, 3 records are created, all with the same name of www. DNS will allow a DNS record to be created even if there is already a DNS record that exists with the same name. To understand why, consider what happens when 4 workstations on the network request the DNS record www, one after the other. If Round Robin is enabled, the following will occur. The first workstation will obtain the DNS record www that has the address of SRV1 in it. The next workstation, when it requests the DNS record for www, will receive the address of SRV2. The third workstation will receive the third DNS record. When the fourth workstation requests the DNS record for www, this time the DNS server will loop back to the first DNS record. As you can see, when multiple DNS records are present with the same name, the DNS server will simply loop through the available DNS records, returning each DNS record in turn. This process is what is referred to as Round Robin. Round Robin is often used for simple load balancing. It performs load balancing because it distributes the load between servers by cycling through the available DNS records. It is a simple load balancing system since it does not take into account the load of the server the user is being directed to. The next problem with this approach is that the user could be directed to a server that is in a different country rather than using a server that is on the same network. Although the incoming requests are being distributed among the available servers, directing the user across WAN links rather than using a local server when one is available is not efficient. To overcome this problem, the next feature, DNS Netmask Ordering, can be used in conjunction with Round Robin. When Netmask Ordering is enabled, the DNS server will attempt to return a DNS record on the same network as the client. Let us consider 2 different networks, each with a web server, and each network has a desktop computer on it. What you want is for the client on each network to be directed to the server that is on the same network as the client. Netmask Ordering does this by looking at the IP address of the requesting client and returning a DNS record in the same network as the client, when possible. If you consider this example, in this case, it makes sense for the DNS server to return a DNS record in the same network as the client, since the web server is local to the client. If a second computer was added to the network, even with DNS Round Robin enabled, you will still want the client to receive the IP address of the local web server rather than receive the address of a remote server. So, if you have both Netmask Ordering and Round Robin enabled, this is what happens. If I add a second server to the second network, and then add a second desktop to the network, this time, when the second desktop requests the address of the web server, it will receive the address of the second web server on that network. If I add a third desktop, notice that when it requests the address of the web server, it will get the address of the first web server on the network. So essentially, when Netmask Ordering is enabled and Round Robin is enabled, all the DNS records for that network will be cycled through. You can see how Round Robin and Netmask Ordering can be used together. I will change to my Windows 8 computer with remote administration tools installed to have a look at how to configure DNS Round Robin and Netmask Ordering. To start configuring Round Robin and Netmask Ordering, I will first open Server Manager, and then from the Tools menu, select DNS in order to open the DNS Manager. DNS Manager will ask which DNS server I wish to connect to. In this case, I will enter in NYDC1. Once DNS Manager loads, the first step that I will perform is to create the necessary DNS records that will be used with Round Robin and Netmask Ordering. Since I will be creating multiple DNS records for the same DNS name, which will point to other servers, it would make sense to create CNAME or alias records. By creating a CNAME record, this will automatically change if the server's IP address were to change later on. However, notice that if I right-click on the zone ITFreeTraining.local and select New Alias CNAME, the first CNAME record will be created for www and point it towards the server SRV1. Notice that this DNS record is created without issue. But if I repeat the procedure again for the second server, this time I receive an error message. The message is basically saying that you cannot create multiple CNAME records with the same name. So, unfortunately, I will need to create A records instead, and these DNS records will need to be manually updated if the IP address of any of the servers were to change in the future. So what I will do is exit out of here and then delete the CNAME record that I just created since it cannot be used for Round Robin. To create the DNS records that I need, I will right-click on the DNS zone and select the option New Host. The first record I will call www and then enter in the IP address for SRV1. Once the DNS record is created, I will create a second DNS record for www and use the IP address for server SRV2. So far, I have created two DNS records that are on the same network. The third and final DNS record I will create on a different network. This will point to SRV3. This is enough DNS records to demonstrate how Round Robin and network masking work. Once I exit out of here, notice that the three DNS records that I just created are listed all with the same name but with different IP addresses. These are the IP addresses of the three servers on my network, SRV1, SRV2, and SRV3. If the IP addresses of any of these servers change later on, I will need to manually change these DNS records to reflect changes like that. If I now right-click on the DNS server and select Properties, on the Advanced tab, I can see the configuration settings for Round Robin and Netmask Ordering. You can see by default Round Robin is enabled, and below this that Netmask Ordering is also enabled. To test these settings, I will open a command prompt and run the command nslookup www. nslookup is a command line administrative tool for testing and troubleshooting DNS. In this case, I will run nslookup with the parameter www to show me which DNS records will be returned when I query that DNS name. Notice that all the DNS records are returned. However, what happens is that settings like Round Robin and Netmask Ordering determine which order the DNS records are sorted in and returned to the client. If I now run the command a second time, notice that the order has changed. But something does not seem right. Remember, this client is on the 192.168.2.0 network, but the second address listed is in the 192.168.3.0 network. You would think with Round Robin this would alternate between the two DNS records from the 192.168 network. If I run the command a third time, notice that the first address returned is 192.168.3.5. This does not make sense, as with Netmask Ordering enabled, the IP address of the client should be considered, and thus this address should never be first in the list. Since this IP address is on the same network as two of the DNS records, these should be listed first, and remote IP address should always be listed last. But this is not the case. If I run the same command again, Notice this time the list is changed once again. What appears to be happening is that all the DNS records are cycling through like what you would expect with Round Robin. However, the Netmask part of Round Robin is not working. What has occurred is this computer has an IP6 address. When the computer contacts the DNS server, it uses the IP6 address. For this reason, Netmask Ordering does not work, since the addresses I entered are in IP4. If I run NSLookup again, but this time add the IP4 address of the DNS server, notice that this time the IP address 192.168.3.5 is at the bottom. If I run the command again, notice the list is the same, so would tend to suggest Round Robin is not working. However, this is not the case. If I run the command again, notice the first two addresses have changed, but the last address has stayed the same. If I run the command again, I will get the same result. If I run the command one more time, the first two addresses have changed. Round Robin uses some randomness to work out which results to return. For this reason, when you run the command multiple times, you may get the same results. But you will notice that the two IP addresses are on the same network as the client and are cycling through like you would expect, since Netmask Ordering is enabled. If I now go back to the properties of the DNS server, untick the option Enable Netmask Ordering, and apply the change, now the DNS server is configured to use only Round Robin. If I now go back to the command prompt and run the command again, I am once again given a list of IP addresses. When I run the command a second time, notice that the list cycles through. If I run it again, the list cycles through again. As you can see, Round Robin is working as expected. If I now go back to DNS Properties and untick the option Enable Round Robin and apply the change, notice that when I run the command again, I get a different list of IP addresses. But when I run the command again, I get this same list, and no matter how many times I run the command. So you can see that Round Robin has effectively been disabled. In this particular case, DNS Round Robin and Netmask Ordering have worked as expected. But there is one last setting that you should be aware of that can affect it. If I run the command DNS command, followed by my DNS server and then /config, this will allow me to make changes to the settings on the DNS server. In this case, I will change the setting Local Net Priority Netmask. This is the network mask that is used to determine if the source IP address is on the same network as the DNS record. In this case, I'm using a Class C address, which means that last 8 bits are used for hosts. In this case, I need to use the subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. To do this, I will enter in 0x followed by 6 zeros followed by 2 Fs. This value is the default for the DNS server. If you're using an IP address on the network that has a different network mask, you will need to run this command to change the network mask used with Netmask Ordering. If you don't, you will get some unexpected results. This covers IP4 DNS records when the clients use IP4 or IP6 addresses. But what happens when IP6 records are added? Before I add some IP6 records, I will first go back to the properties of the DNS server and tick the tick box Enable Round Robin. However, I will leave the tick box Enable Netmask Ordering unticked just to prove a point. Once I exit out of the DNS server properties, I will next right-click on the zone and select New Host. I will once again enter a DNS record for www, but this time enter in the IP6 address. Following this, I will create a DNS record for the other 2 servers, so that once complete, I will have 6 DNS records in total. 3 IP4, and 3 IP6. Now that all the DNS records are created, I will go back to the command prompt and run the command nslookup for www. This time, there are 6 DNS records returned. If I run the command again, notice that the DNS records are cycled through. If I run the command again, the DNS records will cycle through again. So it would appear that Round Robin is working as expected and Netmask Ordering is disabled as expected. Notice that IP6 records will always be at the top, followed by IP4, as newer editions of Windows favor the IP6 protocol when there is a choice. If I now perform a ping command, notice that the IP address that is returned is on the same network as the client. If I run the command ipconfig/flushdns, this will remove any DNS records stored in the local cache. If I now run the ping command again, since the cache has been cleared, this will force the client to contact the DNS server again to resolve the address. Notice that I obtained the same result as before. However, also remember that it is possible with Round Robin to obtain the same result twice in a row, so I will clear the cache again and then run the ping command again. Notice that this time I will obtain the other local DNS record. If I perform these steps multiple times in a row, that is, clear the cache and run the ping command, something interesting will be seen. What is happening is the 2 local IP addresses are being returned. However, not even once is the 3rd DNS record that contains the remote IP address returned. So, from these results, you would conclude that Netmask Ordering has been enabled. But we know this is not the case. What has happened is IP6 has additional functionality included in the client, which takes a list of IP addresses returned from the DNS server and chooses one that is close to the client. This is additional functionality that is built into the IP6 protocol that is not included in IP4. What this effectively means is that enabling or disabling the Netmask Ordering settings on the DNS server has no effect when IP6 records are used. If I now go back to the properties of the DNS server, this time I will untick the option Enable Round Robin. Once I go back to the command prompt and run the command nslookup for www, notice which IP addresses are returned. If I run the command again, notice that the same list of IP addresses is returned. So you can see that switching off Round Robin means the same list of IP addresses is returned each time. If I clear the local DNS cache again and run the ping command again, once again I will obtain the same address. If I keep clearing the cache and running the ping command over and over again, notice that the same IP address will always be returned. This shows that disabling Round Robin does work with IP6. Even though Netmask Ordering is disabled, IP6 will always choose a local IP address if one is available due to this functionality being added to the protocol. The effect when both are disabled is that the same local IP address will always be used. There has been a lot covered in this video, so I will go through a quick summary of the main points. If you have a client with an IP4 address querying a DNS server with IP4 records, the following will occur. With Round Robin enabled and Netmask Ordering disabled, the DNS server will cycle through the available DNS records on the server regardless of which network the client and the DNS records are on. If Round Robin and Netmask Ordering are enabled, which is the default for DNS server, the DNS server will return a DNS record on the same network as the client when one exists. If multiple DNS records exist for the same network, they will be cycled through. Make sure that if you are not using the subnet mask 255.255.255.0, that you run DNS command to change the subnet mask. Otherwise, you will get some unexpected results. Next, if your client is using an IP6 address, this will effectively break Netmask ordering when the DNS server only contains IP4 records. This is because the DNS server will look at the client IP and will not be able to match the network. Effectively, since the client is using an IP6 address to contact the DNS server cannot determine which IP4 network the client came from. For this reason, Netmask ordering will effectively be disabled, and only round robin will work if it is enabled. Lastly, if your client is using an IP6 address and requests an IP6 address, Netmask ordering is performed by the client. This means the Netmask ordering setting on the server is effectively ignored or basically has no effect. Round robin still works as normal. As you can see, there is not much to round robin and Netmask ordering, but there are a couple of tricks that, if you are not aware of them, can cause it to work not as expected, particularly when IP6 is used. With careful planning, you should be able to get a good result on your network. Thanks for watching this video from ITFreeTraining. More videos on DNS and other courses are available on our website and YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.